Spring Television. Ours it is.
Good evening and welcome to Spring Global on Western Spring Television. Now the headlines. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu meets frontline troops in Ukraine. Al-Shabaab militants kill 2 police officers and a civilian in eastern Kenya. United Nations Security Council calls on Myanmar military rulers to release all political prisoners. My name is Damilola Raphael. The Russian Defense Ministry has announced that its minister, Sergei Shoigu, visited army units fighting in Ukraine. In a statement, the ministry says that Shoigu had visited Russian units deployed to the area of the special military operation, using Moscow's term for the conflict in Ukraine. The ministry did not, however, specify where the visit took place. Russia says the expansion of Western weapon supplies to Ukraine has led to an aggravation of the conflict and does not bode well for Ukraine. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov made this known in what is an official Russian reaction to Zelensky's visit to Washington and the announcement of new U.S. military aid to Ukraine. He stated that the U.S. supplies of Patriot missile systems to Ukraine will not contribute to ending the conflict and would not prevent Russia from achieving its goals. Peskov said that there had been no signs for peace talks during Zelensky's visit, adding that this was evidence that the United States was fighting a proxy war with Russia to the last Ukrainian. President Biden had earlier said the U.S. and Ukraine would continue to project a united defense as Russia wages a brutal assault on Ukraine's right to exist as a nation. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has said in a defiant address to U.S. lawmakers on his first foreign trip since Russia's invasion that Ukraine is alive and will never surrender. In a speech where he urged the U.S. for more help, Zelensky stated that U.S. military aid to Ukraine was not charity, but an investment in security for the future. His appeal comes amid signs U.S. support is likely to face greater scrutiny by Republican lawmakers in Congress. But President Joe Biden vowed to stick by Ukraine for as long as it takes. Biden pledged a new $2 billion aid package and promised another $45 billion.
In our alliance, Ukraine never asked the American soldiers to fight on our land instead of us. I assure you that Ukrainian soldiers can perfectly operate American tanks and planes themselves. Financial assistance is also critically important, and I would like to thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for both financial packages you have already provided us with and the ones you may be willing to decide on. Your money is not charity. It's an investment in the global security and democracy that we handle in the most responsible way.
Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko says his country's recent military activity was not aimed at Ukraine and dismisses conspiracy theories about armed forces being deployed at the border. Lukashenko, speaking at a conference of military leaders marking the end of snap military inspections held this month, said he could not rule out aggression against the Belarus on the part of unspecified neighbors. Lukashenko stated that the military moves were limited to Belarusian territory and did not threaten anyone else. In recent weeks, Belarus has announced military readiness checks and a new deployment of Russian troops. Russian President Vladimir Putin has also visited Lukashenko on Monday in his first visit to Minsk in 3.5 years. Armenia has accused Russian peacekeepers of failing to prevent what is called an illegal blockade in Azerbaijan's Armenian-populated Nagorno-Karabakh region, which has sparked two wars between the neighbors. Yerevan has accused Baku of creating a humanitarian crisis in the mountainous enclave by blocking the sole land link connecting it to Armenia. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan said the Russian peacekeeping contingent in Karabakh is not fulfilling its obligation to control the Lachin corridor. Azerbaijani activists have since last week blocked the key roads to protest against what they claim is illegal mining. Baku claims the protest was spontaneous and civilian transport can move freely in both directions between Armenia and Karabakh. But Yerevan has accused it of staging the demonstrations, and Pashinyan said that the crisis in the Lachin corridor has not yet been resolved. However, the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Russian peacekeepers are doing everything possible to ensure order and calm in the territories where they are deployed. In Africa, Al-Shabaab fighters have attacked a police vehicle in eastern Kenya, killing 2 officers and 1 civilian. According to a police statement, the truck was traveling from Haile Lapsset camp to Garissa town, about 75 miles from the Somali border, when it hit an explosive device. Police said the fighters then fired a rocket-propelled grenade at the vehicle and engaged in a heavy firefight which kills the victims. However, Al-Shabaab's Radio Andalus in a broadcast said the group's gunmen killed 2 Kenyan security force members and injured several others in the attack. The Al-Qaeda-linked group continues to make cross-border raids to pressure Kenya into withdrawing its forces from the African Union-mandated peacekeeping force in Somalia. The former head of Cameroon's public broadcaster, Amadou Vamoke, has been sentenced to 12 years in prison after being in detention for more than 6 years. Vamoke was convicted by a court in the capital, Yaoundé, of embezzling money and awarding staff salary bonuses without authorization. The 73-year-old denied any wrongdoing, while his trial was widely criticized by human rights groups. Vamoke was arrested under Operation Sparrowhawk, which critics say has been used by President Paul Biya's government to lock up people seen as problematic. Vamoke's trial was inexplicably adjourned more than 100 times. Palestinian medics say Israeli forces killed a 23-year-old footballer and wounded 5 others during confrontations in the occupied West Bank. It revealed that Ahmed Darahmeh was mortally wounded early this morning when Palestinians exchanged fire with Israeli troops who raided the city of Nablus. Palestinian media reported that Darahmeh played football for the West Bank Premier League club Sakafi Tokaram. It is, however, unclear whether he was taking part in the confrontations. However, the Israeli military said they had fired at Palestinians who had thrown explosives and shot at Israeli troops when they arrived in Nablus, adding the suspects were hit. Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu said he has secured a deal to form a new government with hardline religious and far-right political partners, which will see him return to power as the head of the most right-wing coalition in Israel's history. Following his November 1 election win, Netanyahu secured a mandate to form a government backed by ultra-Orthodox Jewish parties and an extreme right bloc. Minutes before a deadline to conclude coalition talks expires at midnight yesterday, Netanyahu informed Israel's President Isaac Herzog by phone that he had been able to establish a government. According to a statement from Netanyahu's office, it was not immediately clear when the new government would be sworn in, but Netanyahu told Herzog he intended to do so as soon as possible. The World Health Organization says China may be struggling to keep a tally of COVID-19 infections as the country experiences a big spike in cases. WHO's Emergencies Director Mike Ryan disclosed this yesterday, stating that official figures from China have become an unreliable guide as less testing is being done across the country following the recent easing of the strict zero-COVID policy. Ryan said China has continued to report relatively low numbers of cases in intensive care units, but anecdotally, the ICUs are filling up, while bodies continue to pile up in the mortuary. He said the body was ready to work with China to improve the way the country collects data around critical factors such as hospitalization and death. You're watching Spring Global on Western Spring Television. We will be right back after this break.
It's a culture on its own. It has its own language, its own people, with their own way of life. The world of sports is never void.
Western Spring Television, channel 190, only on Star Times.
Bẹ́gùn bá jáde, mọ̀rìnwó la kọ́kọ́ rí, ọwọ́ gẹ́gẹ́ ní síwájú ìjó, ẹsẹ̀ katakata ní síwájú rìn, bẹ́ẹ̀ bá ti ń gbúrò wa, a tún ti dé náà nù. Ẹ káàbọ̀ sórí ètò Owambe Unlimited. Pẹ̀lú èmi ọmọ yín, olólùfẹ́ yín, ọ̀rẹ́ yín, Suliat tẹ́túmọ̀ sí Morenikeji. Ẹ lè pè mí ní Susu, tó bá wẹ̀ lómi, a sọ pé ìyálòde àríyá, gbogbo orúkọ tẹ́ ẹ bá pè mí, kò sí èyí tí mi ò ní jẹ yín. Ẹ farabalẹ̀, kẹ́ ẹ máa gbádùn ètò Owambe Unlimited lórí ìkànnì Western Spring Television ní ìkànnì 190. Ibẹ̀ ni Owambe Unlimited ń bọ̀ wá, ẹ fàkùrẹ̀ tẹ̀dí, kẹ́ ẹ máa gbádùn ètò àríyá wa.
Wọ́n sọ fún yín pé ẹ máa wo Owambe Unlimited lórí Western Spring Television.
Western Spring Television. Ours it is.
You're welcome back. The United Nations Security Council has adopted its first resolution on Myanmar in 74 years, calling on the country's military rulers to release all political prisoners, including democratically elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Myanmar's military seized power from Suu Kyi's elected government in February 2021, arresting her and other officials, and has responded to pro-democracy protests and dissent with little force that has led to the deaths of thousands of people and seen more than 16,000 jailed. China and Russia, who have backed Myanmar's military leaders since the coup, abstained from the UN vote yesterday alongside India. The remaining top members of the powerful council voted in favor of the resolution demanding an end to violence. The only other resolution concerning Myanmar was adopted by the Security Council in 1948 when the body recommended the UN General Assembly admit the country, then known as Burma, as a member of the World Body. India has begun randomly testing international passengers arriving at its airports for COVID-19, citing an increase in cases in neighboring China. The country's Federal Health Minister, Mansour Mandavia, announced the new rule in Parliament today. He also called on state governments to increase surveillance for any new coronavirus variant. Local media reports said at least 4 cases of BF7 of the Omicron subvariant that is driving a current surge in China have been found in India so far. The alleged boss of Asia's biggest crime syndicate and one of the world's most wanted men, Tse Chi Lop, has been extradited to Australia and arrested on drug trafficking charges. Australian police said that the suspect's extradition from the Netherlands was the culmination of a long-running investigation into an organized crime syndicate known as Samgor or the company. Chinese-born Canadian citizen Tse Chi Lop, who is suspected of being the leader of the Asian mega cartel, is believed to have laundered billions of drug money through casinos, hotels, and real estate in Southeast Asia's Mekong region. Tse appeared in front of a Melbourne magistrate's court today to answer a charge of being part of a conspiracy to traffic commercial quantities of controlled drugs totaling 20 kilograms between 2012 and 2013 into Australia. Japan says it is investigating the reports that China has set up covert police stations inside Japan amid similar checks by authorities in European countries, the United States, and Canada. An Asia-focused rights group based in Spain, Safeguard Defenders, has published 2 reports since September alleging that Chinese authorities have established 102 overseas police stations in 53 countries, including Japan. China has dismissed the allegations, and its foreign ministry today denied that such police stations existed. Japan's chief cabinet secretary, Hirokazu Matsuno, said Japan had told Chinese authorities that any activity that violated Japan's sovereignty would be unacceptable. The outbreak of protests and strikes in Jordan and some cases of accompanying violence have shed light on the worsening economic situation in the country. Protests against a rise in fuel prices have waned in intensity but have not yet died out, still occurring sporadically in Jordan's southern governorate, the epicenter of the recent anti-government events. On December 15, a senior police officer was killed in the southern city of Man during clashes with demonstrators, and 3 police officers were killed on Monday during a raid on the hideout of the suspected killer. Truck and public transport drivers began striking 2 weeks ago. Some of the protests have flared into riots, which have spread throughout the kingdom, reaching the capital, Amman, over the weekend. United States forecasters has warned a major winter storm sweeping the country this week may bring the coldest Christmas in 4 decades. More than 90 million people are under winter weather alerts across 37 states. About 80% of the nation is set to experience sub-zero temperatures, including places as far as south as Texas. The National Weather Service said bone-chilling temperatures of minus 4 to 5 centigrade were possible by the end of this week in some parts of the country. Named Winter Storm Elliott by the Weather Channel, the Arctic blast is expected to deliver the coldest Christmas to the Midwest since the late 1980s, according to forecasts. A signed copy of a transcript of New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern insulting an opposition leader has sold for more than 100,000 New Zealand dollars. The offensive comment was picked up by microphones following a heated exchange with ACT Party leader David Seymour. Ms. Ardern later apologized for the remark before Mr. Seymour proposed they join forces to raise money for New Zealand's Prostate Cancer Foundation. The PM thanks everyone who bid after the charity auction ended today. During a lively parliamentary debate last week, Ms. Ardern took issue when Mr. Seymour, leader of the right-wing Libertarian ACT Party, Ms. Ardern defended her Labour government record before sitting down and quietly muttering the offensive word.
Stake apologising for it properly and fixing it.
Mr. Speaker, there's been a number of occasions where we acknowledge that we will not have perfect responses. We've openly, Mr. Speaker, said that, for instance, MIQ was something that was very difficult at the time and that there were people affected by it and that we would do things differently were we ever confronted with that again. But, Mr. Speaker, I stand by the work that we've done as a government over this last year and over this past term. We've always made decisions that we believe to be in the best interests of New Zealand at the time.
Question number 5, Nicola Willis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister.
In business, Bahamas-based Sam Bankman-Fried, former boss of failed cryptocurrency exchange FTX, has arrived by plane in New York to face fraud charges. U.S. authorities have said the 30-year-old was extradited on suspicion of committing one of the biggest financial frauds in U.S. history. Bankman-Fried, who denies the allegations, may appear in court later today. 2 of his former associates have pleaded guilty to related charges. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Damian Williams, announced that FTX co-founder Gary Wang and Caroline Ellison were both charged with roles in the frauds that contributed to FTX's collapse. They are both now cooperating with the Southern District of New York as court documents were released.
We announced charges against Samuel Bankman-Fried for a sweeping fraud scheme that contributed to FTX's collapse and for a campaign finance scheme that sought to influence public policy in Washington. As I said last week, this investigation is very much ongoing and it's moving very quickly. I also said that last week's announcement would not be our last. And let me be clear once again, neither is today's. I want to make 2 announcements. First, I'm announcing that the Southern District of New York has filed charges against Caroline Ellison, the former CEO of Alameda Research, and Gary Wang, a co-founder of FTX, in connection with their roles in the frauds that contributed to FTX's collapse. Both Ms. Ellison and Mr. Wang have pled guilty to those charges, and they are both cooperating with the Southern District of New York. Let me reiterate a call that I made last week. If you participated in misconduct at FTX or Alameda, now is the time to get ahead of it. We are moving quickly, and our patience is not eternal. Second, I'm announcing that Samuel Bankman-Fried is now in FBI custody and is on his way back to the United States. He will be transported directly to the Southern District of New York, and he will appear in court before a judge in this district as soon as possible.
Before we end Spring Global, here is a recap of our top stories. The Russian Defense Ministry has announced that its minister, Sergei Shoigu, visited army units fighting in Ukraine. Al-Shabaab fighters have attacked a police vehicle in eastern Kenya, killing 2 officers and 1 civilian. The United Nations Security Council has adopted its first resolution on Myanmar in 74 years, calling on the country's military rulers to release all political prisoners, including democratically elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi. You can follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Western Spring Television. You can also watch us live on our YouTube channel at Western Spring Television. I am Damilola Raphael. Thanks for watching. Good evening.